While the world's attention is captivated by Israel's massacre in Gaza, the diplomatic interactions among Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran, the three major Middle Eastern powers, should be the most shocking. Similar to the Saudi-Iranian reconciliation declaration signed in Beijing in the first half of the year, this not only significantly impacts Middle Eastern geopolitics but also America's Middle Eastern strategy. With China and Russia teaming up successively against the Middle Eastern strategy, they are set to completely shatter America's global dominance strategy. America is destined to lose in this great power competition. Despite Russia gradually gaining the upper hand in the Ukrainian battleground, it's still a significant drain on Russia. Now, the sudden outbreak of war between Israel and Hamas militants has drastically shifted global attention. The U.S. is compelled to divert its focus to the Middle East situation, not only alleviating pressure on Russia in the Ukrainian theater but also providing a crucial opportunity for Russia to proactively create trouble for the U.S. Originally, the pressure on the already struggling U.S.-led NATO in the Ukrainian conflict escalated further with the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war. The pressure on Russia, which had been gaining an upper hand, suddenly eased. It seems only a matter of time for Ukraine to surrender, and this will likely come with certain conditions. In this video, we'll delve into the shattering of America's global dominance strategy and discuss the following: Russia's significant elevation of influence in the Middle East, the growing distance between Middle Eastern countries and the U.S., the dilemmas faced by the U.S. in Ukraine and the Middle East, the decline of America's global influence. Russia has always wielded considerable influence in the Middle East. However, the U.S. strong support for Israel's massacre significantly alienates the region, further highlighting Russia's influence. This becomes a vital asset for Russia's forceful involvement in the Middle Eastern situation. Iran has been a traditional strategic partner for Russia and is the strongest military power in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are leaders in the Arab League. Putin's recent diplomatic maneuver in the Middle East swiftly secured these three major Middle Eastern nations, undoubtedly amplifying Russia's influence in the region. The crucial point isn't merely about the positive interaction between Russia and these three countries, which might alleviate its own battlefield and economic pressures. It signifies a deeper estrangement between the Islamic world and the U.S., hastening the evolution of Middle Eastern geopolitics. The U.S. strong backing of Israel's actions in Gaza has sparked global outrage. The Islamic world is increasingly aware of the detrimental or destructive nature of America's Middle Eastern strategy. The existing estrangement from the U.S. will intensify, further propelling the de-Americanization of Middle Eastern geopolitics. The U.S. consistently emphasizes robustly supporting Ukraine's victory, and NATO echoes the continuous weakening of Russia. Amidst severe U.S.-Russia hostility, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates actively engage in diplomacy with Russia. On one hand, they hope for Russia's active intervention in the Middle East situation, while on the other, it inevitably strengthens economic, trade, and international cooperation with Russia. This inherently indicates a further drift from relations with the U.S. If previously Middle Eastern countries adopted a neutral stance on the Ukrainian conflict, it seems they are inclined to support Russia now. Despite the U.S. shifting its strategic focus eastward, the Middle East remains a globally strategic location, especially concerning energy resources. The U.S. global dominance strategy heavily relies on the Middle East as an indispensable component. Losing control over the Middle East situation or failing to manage its geopolitical evolution could lead to a complete collapse of its global strategy. From the itinerary and outcomes of the visit, it's evident that Putin has achieved significant success this time. Describing Russian-Saudi relations as reaching unprecedented levels echoes phrasing previously used only in Sino-Russian relations. It indicates the rapid escalation of Russian-Saudi relations. Putin's unexpected and astonishing visit to the Middle East probably leaves the U.S. in a mixed state of emotions. In the first half of the year, under China's coordination, Saudi Arabia and Iran signed the Beijing Declaration. This event can be seen as the dawn of a new era of reconciliation and peace in the Middle East. The sudden handshake between these once arch-rivals almost overnight resolved nearly all conflicts and disputes in the Middle East. This signifies reconciliation between Shiite and Sunni factions, awakening and uniting the Islamic world. Subsequently, a de-Americanization of geopolitical dynamics naturally follows. While China's interaction with Arab nations marked the start of a new era in Middle Eastern geopolitics, Putin's actions this time signal an acceleration of this evolution. It also means the Islamic world is entering a new era of estrangement or even conflicting interests with the US. Regardless of Israel's might, it's unlikely to control the swift changes and power balances in the Middle East, which are integral to the reconstruction of global order. The forceful actions by China and Russia in the Middle East, sequentially, have struck at the heart of America's hegemonic strategy. If in the past, the formidable U.S. military was unstoppable and always expected to win, the current scenario anticipates avoiding losses rather than the necessity of winning. Despite strong support for Ukraine, the battlefield situation remains unaltered. Currently, Ukraine's potential for war and its willpower are on the brink of collapse. The US's support for Ukraine is wavering, also facing significant constraints and consumption due to the Israel-Hamas conflict. Constant vigilance against the conflict's escalation is necessary. Support for Ukraine can only weaken, prompting Biden's recent fervent, even irritable, calls to Congress for funding. The fear of triggering a Middle Eastern war while dreading Ukraine's rapid surrender transcends the core issue of the wars themselves. For the US, whether in the Ukraine conflict or the Israel-Hamas war, what's crucial isn't the process or outcome of the wars but the subsequent geopolitical reconstruction or evolution post-ceasefire. Handling the aftermath is the real trouble for the US. It signifies a significant strategic failure for the US to cease fire in Ukraine without weakening Russia. Ukraine can only exchange land for peace, making this war incredibly costly for Russia. The pivotal concern is how the US will confront Russia after the ceasefire. How will it address the reconstruction of Europe's new security order? Continuing sanctions or hostility might pave the way for new wars to emerge. Recently, Biden emphasized that if Russia prevails, the next NATO country might face an attack. This is no idle talk. As long as the hostile policies persist, countries bordering Russia face the potential and danger of Russia taking special military actions. Post-ceasefire, the US likely confronts significant disagreements with an independent-minded Europe regarding the reconstruction of security order. Thus, after the ceasefire in Ukraine, America's troubles might escalate. While the interactions between Russia and the Middle Eastern trio, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran, did not explicitly outline strategies targeting the US or Israel, evidently, this remains the primary focus. This aids in aligning the positions of Islamic countries. The US is unconcerned about the war's outcome but is focused on Middle Eastern countries uniting. If a major war erupts in the Middle East, the US will sink deeper into the quagmire of war. Even if there's a ceasefire, repairing the rift between Islamic countries and the US seems unlikely. The de-Americanization of Middle Eastern geopolitics will accelerate. These are merely the effects of Russia's intervention. Let's not forget China's assertive involvement. China's goal is undoubtedly to drive the geopolitical evolution in the Middle East towards de-Americanization. With a strategic alignment or cooperation between China and Russia, their increased influence in reshaping the Middle East's evolution undermines U.S. capabilities. As the Middle East's geopolitical transformation accelerates, the U.S. can only strategize to re-engage. This not only disrupts Biden's equilibrium plan for the Middle East but also undermines the entire global strategy, if not the great power competition strategy. If prior to this, the U.S. always held the initiative in great power competition, thereafter, the U.S. might find itself scrambling to handle the joint proactive strikes from China and Russia. Back when Obama chose the Great Escape from the Middle East victory, it was deemed a significant strategic blunder. Hastily withdrawing without complete control over the Middle East situation resulted in losing strategic control over the region. Due to the Middle East's specificity, it's destined to be the grave of America's hegemonic strategy. If America doesn't relinquish its strategy for global domination, the Middle East will forever haunt it. Currently, the U.S. faces a major predicament with Ukraine and Israel. Ostensibly, the U.S. is the behind-the-scenes supporter and manipulator, but in reality, it has become the guardian of these two countries. Whether Zelensky or Netanyahu, their foremost concern is to achieve their political objectives. Once the war stops, political reckonings might be in the cards. All the US can do is provide guns and money. How the war plays out is not entirely within its control. On one hand, it worries about Zelensky suddenly surrendering. On the other, it aims to prevent Netanyahu from igniting a major Middle Eastern war. The US struggles to steer the direction of the war, let alone realize its strategic goals. To sum up, after China swiftly launched the peace process and geopolitical transformation in the Middle East, Putin's recent visit acted as a booster. The strategic consumption and constraints from these two wars on the US are immense. There's inadequate focus to engage in great power competition with China, compounded by the mutual constraints of these two wars. Any escalation or sudden ceasefire in these wars will disadvantage the US. China and Russia's joint sequential strikes are accelerating the geopolitical transformation in the Middle East, thoroughly disrupting America's global hegemony strategy. This is the end of this video. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment. We genuinely appreciate your support.